Hello and welcome back to State of the Division for the second time in June, and UFC 317 has arrived to our doorstep. And it really feels like this month's going to end on a high note. There are some interesting fights early in the card with Price versus Smith, Jacoby Smith looking like an interesting prospect and Price needing to rebound. Araujo versus Cortez looks to be a fun fight, Hermansson Rodrigues holds some promise as well, but the main card really is the fun one here. We've got Talbott versus Lima, Dariush Moicano rebound fight, Joshua Van looking for his third win of the year against Brandon Royval, and two fun-looking title fights. But before we get into all of that, we do have the housekeeping on the Butcher's Bill. I went 8-5 on the last card, not too bad, not too good, bring me to an overall record on the year of 48, 23, and 1. Not a terrible result, but I do think the big mistakes I made were picking Gastelum over Pfeiffer and gambling on Pena instead of Harrison. That one especially hurts in retrospect. But then we move on to the Butcher's Bill. And this is already a little odd, to be honest, but starting off, we do have Justin Tafa having to pull out for undisclosed reasons and being replaced with UFC newcomer Alvin Hines. Also off the card, the night of recording, is Cedric Dumas. He was unable to get his ankle monitor removed before Thursday, which meant he could not fight on the weekend. I don't quite know how that works, but that is the reason that was given. So he's being replaced with Christopher Ewart on short notice, coming to us, I believe, from Fury Fight Club. Opening this all up, at least according to Sherdog, 16-8-0-2 Nico, the hybrid Price, takes the cage against 10-0 Jacoby Kobe Smith. Smith is 6 years younger, but Price is 2 inches taller with 4 inches of reach, also going his way. Nico Price is a weird fighter to try and describe if I'm being honest. But giving it a shot, he is a kill-or-be-killed fighter who has a slight problem with getting decision. He does seem to lean on his striking a fair amount, looking to run the numbers up and threaten his opponents with his finishability. Now, numbers-wise, you see that kill-or-be-killed style with a 5.21 to 5.58 in striking, which does highlight his willingness to exchange and how this hasn't gone well for him in 2 of his last 4 fights. Obviously, he has the KO ability that can catch opponents, and there is a ground game that has been able to use to moderate effectiveness. 5 takedowns for 3-something minutes of ground control in his last win. Does seem a little matchup based with the takedowns only coming in 1 of his 4 last fights, a win over Alex Morono. Smith is a relative newcomer with only 2 UFC fights on record, only 1 not being a contender series fight. That being said, he looks to be a finisher with 8 of his career wins coming by that method, the other 2 wins being decisions. Worth looking at, it seems to be a fairly high-octane fighter who works quick and racks the numbers up even quicker. 7 of his fights ending in the first round. I will say he seems fairly explosive, but I'm not sure about anything when it comes to clinch work or other explosive styles of strikes. Vegas likes Smith by a lot, and as much as I would like to pick Price, as much as some part of me wants to go with Price, knowing what he's capable of doing, Price hasn't been able to find the consistency that Smith has had. And that gives Smith the edge in my mind. Could Price win? Yes. But I'm hard-pressed to picture him winning when I'm comparing him to what Smith has been able to do again and again and again and again. Smith just seems to have the consistency and the ability to stack them, and Price seems to struggle with the takedowns, and we know Smith can stack those well. 8-1, Jonathan Diniz looks to get back to winning against UFC newcomer and late replacement, 7-0, Alvin Guzzi Hines. Even age across the board, 2 inches of height to Diniz with no idea in reach, but I can tell you Diniz has a 79-inch reach. Diniz is a bit of the classical heavyweight swang and bang fighter if you look at his numbers. He's got the striking power in spades, 3 KO finishes in the UFC, all coming in the first 2 rounds. Numbers-wise, sits at a 3.36 to 2.96 in the striking. Numbers showing that he can be tagged up in fights, though he has been able to avoid the power shots in these close ones so far. He has been outpaced once in his most recent fight, but in that matchup he was taken down, and that was where Topuria really went to work. There's no real ground game to speak of, a 0.00 average and no landed UFC takedown. Additionally, he has been taken down in his last 3 fights, and against Topuria he was taken down once for 7 minutes and outstruck 35-15. Hines is the newcomer on about 2 weeks' notice for the fights and seems to be a finisher with both a ground game and some power in his hands. 3 KO and 3 submission wins, and 1 decision win rounding it out. Looking at his fight history, he does seem to go into the second and third more often than nailing the early finish, though admittedly in his last 3 fights he has 2 first-round wins, 1 by KO, 1 by submission. In terms of the ground, he seems to be really able to take initiative or play off his back to sink submissions. I don't have the numbers, but I would imagine that he has a half-decent takedown game. Vegas likes Diniz here, and I feel like gambling. I'm going to run with Hines. Now, I don't have a lot of info on Hines. Diniz is the original fighter. Both things tilt the needle in Diniz's favor. But Diniz is coming off a fight where he really struggled with getting taken down and controlled. And HInes has a lot of submission. He seems to have the submission ability, the ability to go to the ground, to take it to the ground and take control there. If HInes is able to do that to a capacity that Diniz can't answer, as we've seen him was unable to answer Topuria when he took him down, if HInes is capable of even replicating half of Tybura's success and just not getting knocked out, I think he can win the fight. So I'm going to take the gamble, and I'm going to pick the newcomer HInes. 7-0 Christopher El Tanque Ewart takes a late call against fellow UFC newcomer 6-0 Jackson the Moose McVey. McVey is 5 years younger, 3 inches taller, and I have not a clue on reach. Ewart is a fellow newcomer here and comes in as a striking-focused fighter with definite KO power. In his career, he works 5 KO wins and 2 decision. All of his finish wins having come early in the first, which speaks to being a quick starter. He has proven to be able to go the distance with his most recent win being decision, and I will say I don't know about his ground game coming into this. It doesn't seem to be much of anything in his wheelhouse. McVey is the original part of this card, but also a newcomer, coming over from the LFA and looks to be a finisher through and through. 3 KO, 3 submission, rounding out his perfect 6-0 record. Very much as a quick starter, with his longest fights going 3 minutes and 47 seconds into the first. I suppose that does raise some questions about the gas tank if he may struggle going deep. Seems to be explosive in the striking, being able to work his knees in with the normal mix. I don't know about his takedowns, as it seems to have 2 guillotine choke subs, which makes me lean that it's a bit more defensive in nature versus him driving that action. Favorite here is McVey, even with the shifted odds with Dumas dropping out. I'm still gonna kind of agree and pick him to win. This feels like a little bit of a trap pick, especially when you have such a late minute swap, but McVey was preparing for this fight, point in his favor. McVey is a very powerful finisher who's had the consistency of it. It's a point in his favor. Yes, Ewart's a finisher as well, but McVey's coming in more prepared, more set up. And comparing the two, I just like how McVey presents a little bit more. Able to go to the ground or go to the feet. Ewart seems to be just dead on the striking, and if McVey has a decent ground game that he can mix in, I really think he can cause some problems for Ewart. Running on to the prelims. 16-7 Terrence T-Rex McKinney goes for his second win in 2025 against the 8-5-1 Vyacheslav Slavoklas Borschev. McKinney is 3 years younger, 1 inch taller, with 4 inches of reach, also going his way. McKinney comes into this as a killer-be-killed fighter who is definitely a bit streaky and can definitely be caught. Now, starting off, he has a definite preference for striking, with his last 3 wins being by KO in the first. On the feet, he's rocking a 5.91 to 2.59, highlighting the ability to rack up the damage up and apply pressure to his opponent in his wins, overwhelming his opponents in the early rounds and putting them away with explosive power. However, as mentioned, he's a killer be killed, and while he isn't tagged often, the few times he is, his opponent has been able to put him away. Looking back to 2022, he was outpacing Drew Dober, but got finished by a flying knee. Does average a 3.23 takedowns per 15 minutes, but hasn't landed a takedown since July 2023. And a loss. Borschev is another streaky fighter with some finishing touch, but it's horribly inconsistent in getting that to come out. Since 2023, he has notched 1 KO finish and 1 decision win, with a draw and 2 losses. Striking is very power-based with a 5.25 to 4.77, where he tends to keep it close overall and let his power be a deciding factor. As such, he has been outpaced on the feet a few times, not by much, but still worked against him. He does carry a 0.00 takedown average and only a 43% takedown defense. Narrow nod goes to McKinney, and I will just be agreeing. Borschev hasn't had a groove in the UFC, hasn't found his footing, hasn't been able to replicate a lot of his results. And while McKinney is streaky, he's been able to find ways to win, find some consistency, find the style that works, and I just don't feel that from Borschev. I look at his record, I look at his fights, and it seems to be more he manages to win versus finds a way to win. 13-6 Viviane Araujo looks for 2 in a row against 11-2 Tracy Cortez. Cortez is 6 years younger at 32 with either dead even height or 1 inch in favor of Cortez, with 3 in reach going back to Araujo. Araujo is a grinder through and through. She focuses on slowing the fight down and getting a good chunk of control time off the takedowns and ground game. Looking at that first, she averages 1.86 takedowns, but in all but one of her wins has at least 2 takedowns. In her most recent win, she went 3 for 3 on takedowns for 2 minutes and 25 seconds of ground control, and 1 attempted submission. So we see how she relies on taking control and getting the judge's nod, which is a bit of a gamble at times. Does seem to struggle with the striking, getting outstruck in a number of her fights and averaging a 4.04 to 4.87. She keeps it close-ish, but even then is regularly outstruck by 10 in her wins, and sometimes even more. In her losses, the totals can be high as a difference of 50. She doesn't seem to have the KO touch at all, struggling when opponents negate and counter her ground game. Cortez is a grinder as well, and a remarkably similar one, with a 2.09 takedown average and takedowns in all but one of her UFC wins, with at least 2 takedowns in all but one of her UFC fights. Doesn't seem to be much of a finisher, but has attempted submissions in 2 of those fights. Now, she can be matched on the ground, but the fight that happened in was against Rose Namajunas, who took her down 5 times for nearly 7 minutes of control. She can work without the takedowns, seen as her fight against Jazu Davicius, and in regards to striking, works a grappler standard 372 to 302. Lets her hang in close with most of her opponents, but sometimes take the lead to get the points. Vegas likes Cortez, and I will agree. My main reasoning is that Araujo relies on slowing the fight down with takedowns and taking control. Without that, she doesn't fall apart, but does struggle significantly more. And Cortez has shown the ability to survive takedowns or negate that and take control herself. And I think Araujo, without her main piece, has to rely on her striking, which she is pretty consistently outstruck in. So in that regard, I'm going to lean Cortez for this fight. 11-0 hider, the Hurricane Amil looks to stay perfect against the 9-1 Jose Delgado. Delgado is 8 years younger, 2 or 3 inches taller, depending on the site, with 3 inches of reach going his way. Amil looks to be a finisher with an emphasis on the striking, looking to push a quick pace and overwhelm his opponents to put them away. In that regard, carries a 6.84 to 4 flat in striking, highlighting that pace, but also showing that he can be caught in a few exchanges. He has proven the ability to work through that and still get decision wins. Normally, though, he does still lead the action and hold that lead till the end of the fight. When it comes to the ground game, he does only carry a .78 and 2 total takedowns in the UFC. Off of the landed takedowns, he has been able to generate solid chunks of control time, helping disrupt his opponents and set up some ground and pound. He also has proven the ability to take control and survive being taken down by his opponent. Delgado is also a finisher with what looks to be an explosive style with some serious power, and outside the UFC, a dangerous submission game. On the feet, he's working a 6.50 to 3.52 across 2 fights and 5 career KO wins. Definitely likes to bring the power and the explosiveness to his fights, where he swarms you with strikes, putting them in a hole before putting the opponent away. In terms of the takedowns, his average is a bit of a lie, a 4.80 average, with only 3 landed takedowns in his Contender Series fight. Obviously, he has a submission game, and a dangerous one that he's been able to call on to good success outside the UFC. Delgado gets the narrow nod from Vegas and is the favorite in this fight, but I will be disagreeing. I'm going to run with Amil. This seems to be a pretty close fight, both fighters having the finish ability and a ground game that can take control and even finish there. So when I'm looking at Amil, I see that he has the ability to endure takedowns and capitalize on limited takedowns for submission attempts to put pressure on his opponents. Both things are things that Delgado likes to do. But if Amil is able to counter them, they put it back on the feet, and it's about dead even again. And I think Amil has the ability to win this fight and the ability to counter what Delgado likes to do a lot. He likes the takedowns, likes the submissions. If he can counter those, limit the damage from them, he can go the distance or even keep the fight on the feet, where I think he's at least even or has the slightest edge. Ending the prelims off, 24-8 Jack, the Joker Hermansson looks for 2 in a row against 16-6 Gregory, RoboCop Rodrigues. Rodrigues is 4 years younger, 2 inches taller, with 2 inches of reach, going to Hermansson. Hermansson is a grinder with a bit of a varied approach, and by that I mean that while he doesn't finish that often, he focuses on outpacing his opponent in the strikes, while also being able to take chunks of control time while disrupting their offense. Looking at his ground game, he rolls with a 1.53 average, with takedowns in 2 of his last 4 wins and 4 of his last 7 fights. He does tend to stack them when he lands, but has been shut down in some fights. But when he does land, he does stack and rack up solid chunks of control time. In turn, he doesn't get taken down often, but has proven the ability to work defensively and secure submissions from getting taken down. On the feet, he works a 5.09 to 3.69, speaking to his ability to outpace and put his opponents on the back foot without taking a whole lot of damage in return. That doesn't mean he's immortal, as he has been put away by fighters he was outpacing and beating in their fights. Rodrigues is more of a killer-be-killed fighter with a fairly varied skill set. Starting with the striking, rolls with a 5.60 to 4.95. Does tend to lead the action and the total numbers, but is always going to take some damage throughout the rounds. Obviously, he has the finish ability with some definite explosive power, but with a killer-be-killed can be caught by his opponent, his most recent loss being an example of that. In terms of the ground game, he works a 2.31 average with a pretty consistent appearance as a disruption tool, with some fights seeing him take some decent chunks of control time. Doesn't necessarily need them to win, but they seem to be something he likes to use. Rodrigues receives the Vegas nod here, and I think I'm going to be rolling with Vegas and picking Rodrigues. I was tempted to roll with Hermansson, but looking back at past fights, Rodrigues has the finish ability, and that's caught Hermansson before. And when it comes to the ground game, Rodrigues has been able to put up good ground game performances, and I think he's going to be capable of at least matching Hermansson there and forcing them back to the feet, where he has the power advantage and does have that finishing touch more than we've seen Hermansson have. Now, Hermansson could slow down the fight and take control that way, but I think Rodrigues has the toolbox and the ability to negate Hermansson's ground game, or at least survive the worst of it, and put the fight back on the feet where he wants to be. Kicking off the action on the main card, 9-1 Peyton Talbott squares off against 14-1 Felipe Jungle Boy Lima. Talbott is a single year younger at 26, 4 inches taller with only 2 inches of reach heading his way. Peyton Talbott is very much a finisher with 3 KO wins in the UFC and 7 total in his career. Still relatively new to the UFC, with his first fight coming November 2023. Does seem to lean into the striking a bit with a 6.73 to 3.75, pulling on both the power and ability to just swarm his opponents. You see that with how he both will finish early in the first with a 13-1 lead, and then goes through 3 rounds to lead 145 to 76. Power isn't his be-all end-all, which gives him flexibility in how his fights change as they progress. Now, he can be controlled, but that seemed to show up more with the ground control in his most recent fight, where he had 1 takedown, but in turn was taken down 8 times, averaging a .32 with the takedowns, limited effectiveness coming as a result. Lima's a bit more of a grinder with some finishability lurking in the wings, with 7 career decision wins that he backs up with a decently rounded game. Starting on the ground, he rolls with a 1.71 average that has made an appearance in both of his UFC fights for a submission win and some decent ground control time. 2 takedowns for 2 minutes and 55 over 3 rounds, for a unanimous decision win. With that in mind, he does have 3 career submission wins that do lead me to believe that he does want to lead action if they go to the ground. Striking has been solid so far, a 3.50 to 2.32, where he's been able to maintain the lead over his opponents and taken some slight damage in return. Vegas likes Lima here, and I'm deciding live because I couldn't make up my mind. Writing the script for the first pass, I very much was with Peyton Talbott. Going back and writing my winner picks, I was very much Lima. Deciding live, I'm gonna gamble. I'm gonna go with Peyton Talbott to win. The reason I'm picking Talbott is that while he has struggled with the ground game, I don't know how aggressive Lima's going to be with the takedowns. Yes, he does average a 1.71, but with 2 takedowns for nearly 3 minutes of control time, that's not the most outrageous total we've seen. And if Talbott can minimize the takedown damage and stay alive, I think he has the definite advantage on the feet, the ability to swarm and outpace him for sure, given that Lima likes to keep it slower and keep the totals a little bit closer together. Lima could definitely win. I'd be an idiot not to say that out loud and acknowledge that. But I just think Talbott has the tools possible to negate Lima, and this is a fight where he might be able to put it together and put some of that veteran experience to good use in order to win this fight. 22-6-1 Benil Dariush looks to right the ship against 26-1 Renato Moicano. Even age across the board, 1 inch of height in favor of Moicano, and another dead draw in reach. Dariush is coming off of 2 straight losses and has very much been a control-focused fighter with some finishability that seems to come out at random times. I mean, looking at his wins, his 3 wins in 2021 were all decisions, with all his wins from 2019 to 2020 coming by finish. Starting with the takedowns, he works a 1.90 average, and in a majority of wins, we see him land takedowns for good chunks of control time that tire his opponent out and make them fight from behind in the points. Striking is solid, a 3.78 to 2.65, letting him hang in and just keep the slight edge over his opponents while working an overall slower pace. Slower pace does put him in danger when it comes to fighters who can land the power punch or ones he's unable to slow down as effectively. He does have the power and some explosiveness, but as I said, he does have some inconsistency with how it gets deployed. Moicano is a finisher who thrives on pummeling his opponent or dominating them on the ground to get the finish. The 4.36 to 3.55 average in strikes helps show this off with how he can explode to these strikes, leading and leaving his opponent in the dust. He's also able to grind out these close wins by relying on other parts of his skill set. Looking at the takedown game as a backup piece, he works a 1.82 average with some dangerous submission ability that has proven to be very effective when deployed. Now with it is the fact that he can take chunks of control time, but does always seem to work for the finish. Vegas has this basically even, which does steal my safety net from me, which is marginally annoying, but I will be going with Moicano here. I'm not super confident in Dariush, which is part of why I'm picking Moicano, but it just seems that Moicano has a skill set that matches or exceeds Dariush in every area. Moicano has the more consistent power in the striking and seems to have the better striking. So let's say he passes Dariush there. Well, let's go to the ground game. Moicano is capable of taking control time, or controlling the ground game. Well, that's what Dariush does, and if he can match Dariush or even just survive Dariush, we go back to the feet where he has the edge. So he just has more boxes ticked in his favor that make me pick Moicano to win this fight. 17-7 Brandon, Raw Dog Royval looks to stop the streaking. 14-2 Joshua, Fearless Van. Van is 9 years younger. Royval is either 2 or 4 inches taller, with 3 inches of reach going his way as well. Royval is a finisher who pushes a quick pace, taking control on the feet with some finishing power and a dangerous takedown game capable of disrupting his opponent's flow and stealing points. On the feet, he racks a 4.46 to 3.06, showing the generally quick pace and ability to use power if his opponent manages to stay close. He does have a pretty explosive and athletic style that can deal some serious damage. He can be outpaced, but it hasn't happened often. In terms of the ground game, he carries a 0.75 takedown average and is more than able to stack them, but the ground control isn't all that present. Instead, it's very much more so a disruption piece instead of domination. Following that is a 45% takedown defense. Van is also a ludicrously quick-paced fighter on the feet, capable of overwhelming his opponent through sheer attrition or even managing to put them away. In the striking, he works an 8.20 to 5.26, showing that pace and ability to leave his opponent behind in terms of the damage. In his last 4 fights, he has crossed triple-digit significant strikes 3 times, while his opponent was stuck in the double digits. Now, he has been caught once in the UFC, which is not a pattern, but is a possibility that does have to be looked at. In terms of the takedowns, he rocks a 0.96 as a purely situational and matchup-based choice used mostly for recovery. More for his purposes is an 81% takedown defense and the ability to survive and get back to the feet. Vegas has it close, and rightfully so, but does give the slightest tip of the cap to Van, and I will be agreeing pretty quickly. Royval is an interesting challenge for Van and one he really needs to beat to kind of make that step to the next echelon. And his ability to endure stacked takedowns and never let his opponents really escape him is very dangerous. But Van has shown the ability to dig a fight out even if it stays close. And with the ground game, he's proven the ability to survive and return to the feet. Royval doesn't always build this terrifying control ground game. And since he doesn't have that, this fight's mostly going to be based on who controls the pace on the feet and who can stay standing. Van's got an 81% takedown defense. He's been able to stay standing against the ground fighters, and he's found ways to survive and come back in fights before. So I'm going to give the nod to Van, but I have to acknowledge that Royval has a recipe to win here. For the flyweight belt, 29-5 Alexandre the Cannibal Pantoja looks for his 4th title defense against the always dead 25-11 0-1 Don't Blink Kai Car France. France is 3 years younger, with either dead even height or 1 inch in favor of Pantoja. France does take back 2 inches of reach, though. Pantoja is a finisher who pushes the pace on the ground and the feet, constantly pressuring and threatening his opponents. I do have to say that he hasn't had the finishing touch as much over his last 4 fights, only finishing his most recent one. That being said, a 4.41 to 3.92 in striking averages, showing that he will get tagged in exchanges, was able to push the pace and take the edge over his opponent in other ways. There is definitely power and explosiveness in space that can catch his opponents in the blink of an eye. Takedowns and submission threat back it all up by allowing him another avenue in case he might get outpaced on the feet. In there, he carries a 2.74 takedown average with a near constant appearance in his wins dating back to 2022. With those, he's able to rack up the control time in spades, limiting his opponent severely but also serving as disruption, letting him take rounds and make his opponent fight from behind. France is a finisher with a very quick pace and the ability to catch his opponents in an instant. 4.56 to 3.22 in striking, showing how he pushes a very similar pace to Pantoja, though his KO touch has been a bit more active. He does work quick, ending most of his fights early in the first, but when it does go longer, we have seen him struggle a bit against high-level opponents. There isn't a whole lot of takedown game present, a 0.61 average where it serves as a disruption or recovery piece over a consistent game plan. More important for him, at least in my opinion, and especially for this fight, is an 88% takedown defense. The champion here remains the favorite, and I find myself agreeing. It's not that France is dead in the water. He has the ability to land the shot and end it, the ability to overwhelm, or the ability to take a moment and win the fight. But Pantoja has that finishability as well. He seems to be able to match the pace that France likes to run on, and then behind that all is a takedown game, which we've seen France struggle with before. Pantoja has a very deep toolbox and a lot of threats that he can throw at you, and I don't know that France has the greatest answer to all of them. If the fight's matched on the feet, chances are it's going to the ground. I don't know how well France can stop the takedown, and if he doesn't, we go to the ground, and I think Pantoja has a major advantage there. For the main event and the lightweight title, 16-0 Ilia El Matador Topuria looks towards the second belt against the 35-10 0-1 Charles Du Bronx Oliveira. Topuria is 7 years younger at 28. Oliveira takes 2 or 3 inches in height, depending on the site, with 5 inches of reach also heading his way. Now, Topuria is a well-rounded finisher, capable of putting you to sleep on the feet or taking you down and just slowing you down. The striking is very much his focus and something he excels at. He's matched up with the likes of Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski, putting both to sleep before the final bell. In the numbers, he rolls a 4.69 to 3.84, so he's able to push a decent pace but rarely makes it in triple digits, with only one of his fights seeing him eclipse 100 significant strikes. Obviously, the finishing power is there, but it seems to waver between straight-up one-shot power and the swarming style. This lets him be in a fight even when his opponent manages to take the striking lead. Backing that up is a solid ground game at 2.02 that does seem somewhat matchup, but is incredibly effective at generating chunks of control time or just getting him disruption he needs to get back onto his pace. Oliveira is Oliveira. He's a fighter that finds ways to win, constantly posing a threat on the ground with submissions and a dangerous guard, plus the ability to find his shot and finish it with a single punch. Looking at his takedowns, he sits at a 2.25, not always shooting them, but when he does, tends to stack them and slowing down his opponent's offense. With that, he does only carry a 56% takedown defense, showing a willingness to go to the ground and play from guard to work a defensive position. He can still get control time by reversing position and taking control. Behind all that's a dangerous and looming submission threat that he's proven the ability to throw from anywhere and catch his opponent in wild ways. Striking is the ground-focused standard, 3.40, 3.21. Not amazing, but good enough to tag his opponent up and apply pressure, letting him set up the ground. Now, the power and ability to get the shot is his major strength, though given how he fights, he is open to being finished. Vegas rolls to Topuria in this main event, and I'm hard-pressed to disagree. I love Oliveira. I want Oliveira to win. I'd love if he got the belt. But I really do think he has a chance. He's always been able to find moments to win and capitalize when chances present themselves, but Topuria just matches up really well, at least on paper. I think his striking is definitely better than Oliveira's. And while Oliveira can find the power shot or find the moment, so can Topuria. And Topuria has had very consistent KO power and recently has matched up with 2 pretty solid strikers that he's been able to beat on the feet. And if it comes to the ground game, I think Oliveira has an edge. But with a 92% takedown defense, Topuria might not go to the ground. And if he thinks Oliveira is going to beat him, he might not initiate the takedown and not let Oliveira pull guard or try to play off his back. So all things considered, I think Topuria has the narrowest of edges when I'm comparing their two styles and how they fight and how their trajectory is coming into this fight. And in the end, that's UFC 317, and I hope you see what I mean when I say June's ending on a high note. This is just a pretty fun card from top to bottom. I think your early prelims have a few interesting fights, newcomers coming in. We're having several new debuts of fighters that could be something, which is always an interesting thing to see. We've got HInes debuting, we've got McVey, and then we've got the last-minute replacement, Christopher Ewart, all kind of coming into this fight and looking interesting, undefeated prospects, new guys coming in to challenge for a heavyweight division that's finally been freed up from the logjam. And that main card's loaded from top to bottom. I love watching Joshua Van fight. I think he's fun. That might be my favorite fight on the card going into this card. I think your 2 title fights are super interesting and they match up really well. They ask a lot of questions that are going to get answered in the octagon. That being said, go ahead, leave a like, leave a comment, and do whatever you want. This has been State of the Division. Have a great fight.